They pulled him over like he was a suspect, not a citizen. One glance, and judgment struck like a gavel. Jason Statham sat behind the wheel of his own car, calm but cornered. The badge didn't see ownership. It saw a fence. Step out of the vehicle. Same tone they use when they've already decided who you are. The car? Registered in his name. The suspicion? Registered in theirs. Jason Statham knew the look. They weren't just checking papers. They were challenging identity. And when they put him in cuffs, that's when the real story began. He didn't just take my keys. He tried to erase my name. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. The engine growled low like it knew the streets by heart. Jason Statham gripped the wheel of his rebuilt 1972 Plymouth. Black paint, chrome trim, every inch a labor of redemption. He didn't buy it off a lot. He resurrected it from rust with his own hands. It was the kind of car that turned heads, not because it was flashy, but because it had a story. He'd just finished a long shift at the youth center, a tucked-away place off Weller Street, where broken kids came to learn how to fix things. Bikes, small engines, scrap with furniture. Things no one cared about until they were made useful again. Jason showed up there every week, not because he had to, because he remembered what it felt like when no one did. That night, sweat clung to his shirt, the faint scent of motor oil trailing him as he pulled out of the back alley, headed toward his apartment on the west side. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you check the mirror more than once. Blue and red lights sliced through the dusk like a blade. Jason pulled over. No panic, no guilt, just a slow breath as he reached for his wallet. The officer approached like he'd already made up his mind. License and registration? Jason handed him over, voice steady. It's all there. The officer didn't even glance down. He looked at the car, looked at Jason, looked at the car again. This is your vehicle? Jason paused, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he recognized the real question behind it. He nodded. Restore it myself. A long silence. Then came the line Jason had heard before in a dozen different ways. Doesn't seem like your kind of car. Jason didn't flinch. You mean someone like me shouldn't drive something like this? The officer smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Step out of the vehicle. Jason looked straight ahead. 1 second. 2. Then unbuckled his belt, stepped out, hands raised slightly, not out of fear, but habit. The same way someone turns off a light they never meant to leave on. The officer patted him down like he was hiding something more than a name. You're being detained for possible vehicle theft, the officer said, already pulling out cuffs. Jason's brow furrowed. I just gave you my ID. The registration matches. Yeah, the officer said, voice cool. Well, the system says this car was flagged. Might be stolen. You can explain that downtown. The cuffs clicked shut like punctuation. Jason didn't fight, didn't argue. He just stared at the car he built from scraps, now being claimed by a system that saw him as scrap too. Around them, voices rose. A group had gathered on the sidewalk. Phones out. That's Jason Statham, someone called. That's his car. He built it. The officer didn't react, didn't pause, just called in a tow. And as Jason was led toward the squad car, he looked over his shoulder, not at the officer, at the car, at the machine that had carried his sweat, his story, his second chance. Now it was being taken, not by a thief, but by the people meant to protect it. The holding cell was cold, not from a temperature, but from the silence, the kind that sits heavy between concrete walls and metal bars. Jason Statham sat on the bench, wrists marked red from the cuffs, jaw locked in a kind of quiet fury. He'd been here before, not this station, not these walls, but this moment, where truth had to wait its turn, where the system told you to sit still while it decided who you were. The officer hadn't said another word during the ride, just filled out a report like it was a foregone conclusion. Grand Theft Auto. Jason chuckled under his breath. A bitter, joyless sound. Guess fixing something yourself doesn't count for much anymore. A rookie deputy brought him water. Looked down at the file, back up at Jason, confused. Sir, it says here the car is registered to you. Is that right? Jason nodded. License and registration both match. Got the title in my glove box, too. The deputy blinked. Then why are you here? Jason didn't answer. He didn't have to. An hour later, they walked him to a small windowless room, where a sergeant reviewed the case file. The name, the registration, the flag on the vehicle. Your car, the sergeant said, tapping the paper. But it came up as recently stolen. Pulled from a city impound lot last month. Jason leaned forward. That's not possible. I've had that car for over 2 years. Built it myself. The sergeant didn't blink. You're telling me the city flagged a car that's been in your possession for years? I'm telling you something's off. The sergeant shrugged. Could be a clerical mistake. Could be someone filed a false report. But with this flag in the system, we had probable cause. Jason clenched his fists, the tension coiling tighter now. So I was arrested for driving my own car because someone else made a mistake? Or maybe someone didn't. The line hung in the air like smoke. Jason was fingerprinted, photographed, and handed a citation with a court date. No apology. No corrections. Just a stiff manila envelope and a vague, "You're free to go." Free, but the car wasn't. It had already been towed, held pending investigation. No return date given. No timeline offered. Outside the station, Jason stood under the bruised sky. Phone buzzing in his hand. Voicemails. Missed calls. The story was already spreading. Kids from the youth center, friends from a neighborhood, people asking if he was okay. He wasn't, because something deeper had shifted. It wasn't just that they'd taken his car. They'd tried to take his narrative, to rewrite who he was, based on where he was and what he looked like behind the wheel of something valuable. And someone out there, someone with access, had made that flag happen, not by accident, by design. Jason walked home. No ride, no noise, just his boots on cracked pavement, each step louder than the last. He'd spent his life building things with integrity. Now someone was tearing him down with a signature and a system that never asked questions. But Jason wasn't just going to fight for a car. He was going to fight for the right to own his story. The next morning, Jason stood on his front porch, hands deep in his hoodie pockets, eyes on the empty driveway, the space where his car should have been stared back like an open wound. He wasn't thinking about the money. He was thinking about the hours, the welds, the paint under his fingernails, the nights he'd stayed up turning bolts and turning his life around. Because building that car meant proving he could fix more than engines. And now, the system had claimed it like it was theirs to take. Jason didn't shout. He got to work. First stop, his friend Mikey's auto shop, 2 blocks from the youth center. A camera sat mounted above the back door, aimed at the alley where Jason parked the Plymouth every shift. Mikey rewound the footage. There was 3 nights before the arrest, a patrol car pulling into the alley, a flashlight moving around Jason's car. The officer leaned in close to the driver's side window, then reached into his vest pocket. Jason's gut dropped. The timestamp didn't lie. He was snooping around my car days before the stop, Jason muttered. Mikey looked at him. You think he planted something? Jason didn't answer. Not yet, but his silence said enough. He made copies of the footage, 1 for himself, 1 for a lawyer friend, and 2 more stashed on separate hard drives. Next, he dug into public records. Took hours, but eventually he found what he was looking for, a pattern. The officer who cuffed him, Sergeant Vince Darrow, had at least 6 complaints filed over the past 2 years, all related to disputed searches, unwarranted vehicle seizures, and harassment without cause. None of them stuck. All of them filed by men from the same 3-block stretch where Jason worked. Jason printed the names, drew a map. Each pin told the same story. Wrong place, wrong assumptions, wrong man. He returned to the precinct, demanded to see the arrest footage. A clerk gave him a copy. When he opened the file at home, his hands froze. Redacted. Entire sections blacked out. The audio glitched. Key exchanges missing. They weren't just trying to bury him. They were erasing evidence. Later that night, a knock at the door. Jason opened it to find Marcus, a sharp-eyed teen from a youth center, usually all jokes and swagger. But tonight, he was shaking. "You gotta hear this," Marcus said, stepping inside. He pulled out his phone, opened a voice recording. "I didn't know what to do. I saw him, man. That cop, couple nights ago. I was coming through the alley, and he was by your car again. He had something in his hand. Looked like a little scanner or tracker. I didn't think it meant nothing until you got arrested." Jason played the audio twice. Then again, he asked Marcus if he was sure. The kid nodded. "I swear on my mom, Jay. I saw it." Jason stood quiet for a long time. They weren't just trying to take his car. They were trying to trap him inside a story they'd written without him. But they'd underestimated one thing. Jason Statham knew how to take things apart, and he was about to dismantle everything. Jason Statham didn't go to war with fists or fury. He went to war with proof. He backed up Marcus's voice recording to a dozen locations, tucked hard copies of the surveillance footage inside manila folders, labeled everything, dates, times, locations. If they were going to erase his name, he'd leave a paper trail so thick they'd choke on it. And then he made a call, a name he hadn't dialed in years. Samantha Reyes, freelance journalist, former addict, current truth hunter. Jason had helped her once, pulled her out of a bad place when no one else would touch her story. She owed him. They met at a cafe 2 towns over. No recording devices, no drama, just 2 people who knew how dark the world could get, sitting across from each other over black coffee and the smell of old betrayal. Jason laid everything out, footage, timestamps, witness accounts, the redacted police video, and the paper trail of complaints that never saw justice. Sam listened in silence, then leaned back and said, "You know they'll try to bury this, right?" Jason nodded. "That's why I came to someone who already knows where the bodies are buried." The next week was a whirlwind. Sam traced the officer's financials, found a connection to a city-contracted towing company called Iron Grip Recovery. On paper, it was just another repo service. In reality, it was run by Darrow's brother-in-law. A cozy little circle. Jason's car, like others before it, had once been impounded years back. A clerical error marked it unclaimed. But instead of being destroyed, it had been flagged in a database Iron Grip quietly monitored, waiting for owners to resurface, waiting to resell or reclaim without the paperwork catching up, until Jason restored it, made it public, made it impossible to ignore. And that's when they moved. Sam published the story in parts, each one sharper than the last. She gave it a title that couldn't be ignored. The car they tried to steal twice. One man's fight against a broken badge. Jason didn't hide. He didn't give interviews. He just stood in his neighborhood, surrounded by the same people who'd watched him get cuffed, and told him the truth, not with a speech. Just a question. He found Sergeant Darrow outside the precinct one afternoon, off duty, leaning against a cruiser like nothing had happened. Jason walked up slow. No crowd. No threats. Just presence. "Tell me," he said, voice steady, "what did you think you'd get for selling out a man's life over a piece of metal?" Darrow didn't respond, just stared. "You looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong. But I built that car. Same way I rebuilt myself. You tried to take it like that meant you could take everything." Darrow's hand twitched near his belt, but he didn't say a word. Jason turned and walked away. The silence behind him was heavier than any answer. If you were in Jason's shoes, would you fight the system or walk away with your silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. The article hit like a lightning strike. By dawn, it had been shared 20,000 times. By noon, it was on every local news station. By nightfall, it had a hashtag. Hashtag Jason owns it. Photos of Jason Statham beside his restored Plymouth-filled timelines. So did the mugshot they'd taken of him, the same one the article revealed as a false arrest. Side by side, the contrast told its own story. The man they tried to label and the man he actually was. Jason didn't celebrate. He watched, waited, and listened. He listened as community leaders demanded answers. He listened as other men, quiet voices from corners of the city, stepped forward to say, That happened to me too. He listened as Sergeant Darrow was suspended pending investigation. And then the court date arrived. Jason walked into the courthouse not as a defendant, but as a storm wrapped in a calm coat. He carried no lawyer, just truth, in his hand. A thick binder of names, statements, timestamps, and the full, unredacted video his journalist friend had retrieved through a legal backdoor. In the gallery sat Marcus, Mikey, Samantha Reyes, and over a dozen kids from the youth center, all of them watching. The judge flipped through file, her brows knitting tighter with each page. She asked questions. The DA stammered. The opposing officer never showed. 15 minutes in, she closed the folder with finality. "The charges are baseless," she said. "This arrest was not just unwarranted. It appears orchestrated." She banged the gavel. "All charges dismissed. Mr. Statham, your car will be returned to you immediately, and I'll be forwarding this to the City Ethics Board." But Jason didn't move. He stood, turned to face the courtroom, and spoke, not loudly but deeply. "You didn't just try to take my car," he said. "You tried to take me, my name, my work, my story." He scanned the faces, locked eyes with the judge. "I've spent the last 5 years showing kids how to build something worth protecting. And now I know I was never just teaching the mechanics. I was teaching them how to claim their place in a world that'll do anything to keep them outside it." A pause. "Then, we don't need apologies. We need systems that don't default to guilt when they see someone who doesn't fit." The courtroom sat in still silence. Then slowly, people rose to their feet, not with applause, but with respect. Later that night, Jason walked into the city impound, papers in hand. They opened the gate. There she sat, his Plymouth, untouched, unbroken, unbent. He slid into the seat, turned the key. The engine roared to life like it never left. The Plymouth rolled back into Jason's driveway like it had never left. Except now, every inch of it told a new story. Not just about restoration, but about resistance. He didn't celebrate. He didn't pose for photos. He parked the car, locked the doors, and sat on the hood as the sun went down behind the rooftops. It wasn't about winning. It was about not letting them take what he'd earned. The city didn't apologize, not officially, but things started moving. The youth center saw its largest donation wave in years. People from across the country sent tools, supplies, handwritten notes. Some gave in Jason's name. Others gave because they'd seen too much of themselves in what happened. The officer, Sergeant Darrow, was placed on indefinite leave. A full audit of Iron Grip recovery was opened. 6 cases were re-examined. 2 victims got their vehicles returned. One man even got a job offer from a local garage after his story made the news. Jason didn't speak to cameras. He didn't have to. Samantha's articles kept the fire lit, and Jason kept showing up to the youth center, just like always. But things were different now. Kids who used to slouch through the door now walked a little taller. They saw in Jason not just a mentor, but proof that being quiet didn't mean being passive. That strength was about force. It was about presence. One afternoon, a boy no older than 10 tugged on Jason's sleeve as he tightened a bolt on a stripped-down motorcycle frame. "Hey, Mr. J?" Jason looked over. "Yeah, I saw that picture of your car online. It's cool you got it back." Jason gave a quiet nod. The boy hesitated. "Then, you think maybe someday I could build something like that?" Jason wiped his hands. "Crouch to eye level. Don't wait for someday," he said. "Start with what you've got. Start with something nobody else can take from you." The boy grinned, ran back to his project. 3 scrap wheels and a bent scooter frame. And Jason? He stood up, looked around the room. The dusty parts, the half-built bikes, the kids leaning over blueprints with smudged hands and stubborn dreams. He saw hope, not the kind that waits to be rescued, the kind that rebuilds anyway. We all get judged by things we never chose. The way we look, the place we live, the shape of our silence. Some people walk through the world with their names stamped in gold. Others have to carve theirs into stone just to be seen. Jason Statham didn't fight back to be loud. He fought back to be clear. They tried to take a car, but what they really tried to steal was something deeper. his dignity, his effort, his place in a world that told him, even after all he'd rebuilt, that he still didn't belong behind the wheel of his own life. But Jason showed us something rare, that sometimes the hardest thing isn't shouting down injustice. It's standing there unwavering while the world tries to erase you, that the truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits in the driver's seat, calm and certain, waiting for the key to turn. Because when you know who you are, you don't need anyone else's permission to prove it. And when you build something from nothing, whether it's a car, a reputation, or a second chance, you don't let go, not because of fear, but because you remember what it cost you to get here. So to anyone out there who's been questioned, cornered, dismissed, to anyone who's been told they don't look right for the life they've earned, let this be your answer. You don't have to explain your worth. Just keep building, because sooner or later, the world's going to have to stop and watch you drive right through the doubt.